The air in St. Jude's Cathedral was thick with the cloying scent of white lilies and unspoken resentments. Just 3 days after they lowered Lillian Dalton into the cold, unforgiving earth, her family gathered in a room that felt even colder, the mahogany-paneled conference room of her husband's lawyer. Her son Leo stood stoic, a perfect imitation of the man his father wished he was. Her daughter Sophia vibrated with a rage so potent it seemed to warm the space around her. They were waiting for their father, Edward Dalton. When the door finally opened, he wasn't alone. On his arm, draped in black silk that was far too fashionable for mourning, was Cassandra Munro, the mistress. He had brought his affair to his wife's funeral, and now he had brought her to the reading of the will. The audacity was breathtaking, but none of them, least of all Edward, could ever have predicted that Lillian Dalton's final words would be her most powerful. From beyond the grave, the game was just beginning. The funeral of Lillian Whitmore Dalton was an event. It wasn't just a service. It was a societal obligation, a final testament to a woman who had been a pillar of the city's philanthropic and social circles. The pews of St. Jude's were a veritable who's who of old money and new power, a sea of somber, expensive black fabric. At the very front sat Edward Dalton, his face a carefully constructed mask of grief. His broad shoulders, usually so confident in their bespoke tailoring, were slumped. He dabbed at his eyes with a pristine handkerchief, a gesture just dramatic enough to be noted by the society columnists in the back. Beside him, their children formed a stark contrast. Leo at 24 was the heir, apparent, his jaw set so tightly it looked like it might crack. He hadn't shed a tear, not because he didn't feel, but because he felt too much. He felt the weight of his mother's absence, the hollow space beside him, where her quiet strength used to be. But more than that, he felt a simmering, visceral hatred for the man his father had become. He had seen the subtle signs for years, the late-night phone calls, the unexplained weekend business trips, the scent of a strange, sweet perfume clinging to his father's coat. Sophia 19 was her mother's fire. Where Lillian had been a controlled burn of intelligence and grace, Sophia was a wildfire of emotion. Her tears were real hot and angry. She refused to even look at her father, her entire body angled away from him, a silent, furious accusation. She clutched the hand of her Aunt Penelope Whitmore, Lillian's younger sister. Penelope's eyes, red-rimmed and sharp, missed nothing, especially not the woman sitting alone in the third pew. Cassandra Munro was a masterpiece of calculated subtlety. Her black dress was demure, her makeup understated, but she couldn't hide the ambition that radiated from her like a heat haze. She was younger than Lillian, with the kind of polished, hungry beauty that old money feared and new money craved. Her presence was a declaration of war. It was a slap in the face to Lillian's memory, to her children, to the entire Whitmore clan. Whispers followed her like a trail of smoke. Is that? He wouldn't dare. The absolute nerve of that man. Edward knew she was there. He had told her to come a power play, so blatant it was almost pathetic. It was his way of stating that the old era was over, and a new one was beginning. He believed with the unshakable arrogance of a man who had always gotten what he wanted, that Lillian's death was a tragic but ultimately convenient end to a chapter. Now he could finally have it all, the Dalton, name the Whitmore fortune that had supercharged his own, and the woman he actually desired. After the final hymn faded, and the coffin began its slow journey out of the cathedral, a tall, silver-haired man approached the fractured family. Gregory Alcott, senior partner at Alcott, Finch and St. John, had been the Whitmore family's legal counsel for 40 years. He had drafted Lillian's first trust fund agreement and her last will and testament. His face was a mask of professional sympathy, but his eyes, when they met Edward's, were as cold as granite. "Edward, Leo, Sophia." He began, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "My deepest condolences. Lillian was an extraordinary woman." "Thank you, Gregory," Edward said, clapping a hand on the lawyer's shoulder in a show of familiar partnership. "We appreciate you coming." "Of course," Alcott replied, subtly shifting away from the touch. "I must inform you that the reading of Lillian's final will is scheduled for this Friday, August 15th at 10 o'clock sharp in my firm's conference room. It is imperative that you all are present." Sophia scoffed a raw, bitter sound. "Already we just buried her." "Your mother was very specific about the timing," Alcott said, his gaze briefly softening as he looked at her. "She insisted on expediency, to settle matters." "We'll be there," Edward confirmed, his mind already racing. The numbers were staggering. Lillian's personal inheritance from her father, the industrialist Frederick Whitmore, was immense. Combined with their shared assets, the Dalton estate was worth north of 9 figures. He had plans, grand plans, plans that involved new ventures, a new life, a new wife, plans that Cassandra was already helping him make. As the family dispersed, walking out into the weak afternoon sun, Leo caught his father's arm. "You're disgusting," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Edward's mask of grief dropped, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Watch your tone, son. This is hardly the time. The time you brought her here, to our mother's funeral." "Cassandra is being supportive," Edward retorted, his voice clipped. "Something you and your sister could learn from. We're a family and we need to move forward." "We are not a family," Sophia's voice cut in. She had doubled back, her eyes blazing. "Not anymore. You made sure of that." Edward simply shook his head, a dismissive gesture that invalidated their grief, their anger, their entire world. He walked away, heading directly for Cassandra's car, which was parked discreetly down the block. Leo and Sophia watched him go, a chasm opening between them and their father. A chasm dug by years of lies, and one final unforgivable act of betrayal. They had no idea that their mother, from her silent resting place, had already built a bridge across it, just for them. The next 2 days were a blur of condolences and casseroles, a hollow performance of mourning. Edward was barely home, spending his nights at Cassandra's downtown penthouse. He claimed the family estate held too many memories. The truth was, it held too much judgment. The portraits of Whitmore ancestors on the walls seemed to watch him with accusing eyes. The staff who had adored Lillian moved around him with a frosty, silent disapproval. On the morning of the 15th, Leo and Sophia drove to the law firm with their Aunt Penelope. The 3 of them were a silent, united front. They were Whitmores, and they were there to protect Lillian's legacy. They were shown into the main conference room. It was a space designed to intimidate, with a 20-foot-long mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and walls lined with leather-bound books that no one ever read. Gregory Alcott was already there, a thick, ribbon-tied document portfolio on the table in front of him. They sat the silence, thick with anticipation. 10 o'clock came and went. At 10:15, the door swung open. Edward strode in a confident smile on his face, and on his arm, looking every bit the lady of the manor she intended to become, was Cassandra Munro. She wore a Chanel suit the color of cream and a string of pearls that were almost certainly a recent gift. Sophia shot to her feet. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "This is a private family matter." "Cassandra is with me," Edward stated calmly, as if that explained everything. "She's part of my life. Get used to it. She has every right to be here." "No," Leo said, his voice dangerously low. He didn't stand, but his presence seemed to fill the room. "She has no right. This is about our mother. Have you no shame? Sit down, both of you," Edward commanded. "This is happening." "Mr. Dalton." Gregory Alcott interjected his voice, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "This meeting is for named beneficiaries and immediate family. Ms. Monroe does not qualify." "She is my partner," Edward insisted, his face hardening. "She stays." A strange, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Alcott's mouth. It was a fleeting expression, gone in an instant, but Penelope saw it. "Very well," the lawyer said, settling back into his chair. "As you wish. But let the record show that Ms. Monroe is present at your insistence against my counsel." He untied the ribbon on the portfolio. "Let us begin," he said, the finality in his tone signaling that the curtain was rising on the final act of Lillian Dalton's life. "This is the last will and testament of Lillian Whitmore Dalton, executed on the 2nd of June this year." Edward's eyes widened slightly. June the 2nd, just 2 months ago. He had assumed her will was years old, a relic from a happier time. This was new. This was recent. A flicker of unease, the first he had felt in days, sparked in his gut. He pushed it down. What could she have possibly done? He held all the cards. He was the husband, the patriarch, the master of this universe. He reached under the table and squeezed Cassandra's hand, a silent reassurance. She smiled back, a confident, predatory gleam in her eyes. They were a team. They had won. Gregory Alcott cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read. His voice was a dry, dispassionate monotone, the voice of a man reciting facts, not a life's final wishes. "I, Lillian Whitmore, Dalton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament revoking all prior wills and codicils." He went through the preliminary clauses, the appointment of Mr. Alcott as executor, the instructions for her burial, which had been followed to the letter. Sophia dabbed her eyes the formal language, bringing a fresh wave of grief. Then came the bequests of personal items. "To my dear sister Penelope Whitmore, I leave my collection of first edition novels and my grandmother's emerald suite. Thank you for being my anchor and my truest friend." Penelope's composure cracked, and she let out a small, choked sob. "To my beloved daughter Sophia," Alcott continued, his voice softening for a moment. "I leave my art studio and all its contents, my personal journals, and the starlight diamond necklace my father gave me on my 18th birthday. May you always shine as brightly as you did in my eyes." Sophia buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "To my beloved son Leo," the will went on. "I leave my portfolio of classic automobiles, my equestrian trophies, and my controlling interest shares in the Whitmore Foundation, the charitable trust established by my grandfather. I trust you to lead it with the integrity and compassion that is your nature." Leo nodded stiffly, his knuckles white, as he gripped the armrest of his chair. Edward listened, a placid smile on his face. This was all expected. The sentimental trinkets, the heirlooms. It was the preamble to the main event. He was waiting for the big numbers, the distribution of the liquid assets, the real estate, the controlling shares in Dalton Industries that had been bolstered and saved by Whitmore Capital. Cassandra sat beside him, a portrait of serene confidence. She gently rubbed a thumb over his hand, her touch a silent promise of the celebratory dinner they would have that night at Aureole, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. "Now," Mr. Alcott said, pausing to take a sip of water. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the family before landing squarely on Edward. "We come to the matter of my husband, Edward Charles Dalton." This was it. Edward sat up a little straighter. Alcott read from the page, his voice returning to its flat, emotionless drone. "To my husband Edward, the man with whom I shared 25 years of my life, I leave the following." He paused for dramatic effect. The tension in the room was a physical thing. First, Alcott said, "I leave him the full and total forgiveness of the $2 million personal loan I provided him in 2018 to cover his substantial gambling debts, a secret I have kept for the sake of our children's peace of mind." The blood drained from Edward's face. His smile vanished. Leo and Sophia stared at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. $2 million gambling. It was a crack in the perfect facade their father had so carefully maintained. Second, Alcott continued relentless, "I leave him the contents of the small safe in our marital bedroom, which to my knowledge contains his collection of Patek Philippe watches. They were always more important to him than my time, so it is only fitting he should keep them." Cassandra's hand tightened on Edward's. Her smile was gone, replaced by a thin, hard line. "And third," Alcott said, raising his eyes from the document to deliver the final blow directly to Edward, "I leave him the sum of $1 to be paid from the petty cash account of the estate." Silence. A thick, suffocating silence filled the room. Sophia let out a sound that was half gasp, half laugh. Leo just stared, his mind struggling to process the words. $1. Edward finally found his voice. It was a strangled whisper. That's a joke. Read the rest of it. The assets, the accounts." "There is no rest of it, Edward," Alcott said calmly. "That is the entirety of your bequest." "This is insane," Edward roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "She wouldn't do this. She couldn't. Half of everything is mine by law. Marital property. You know this, Gregory?" "Ah," said Alcott, a flicker of something that looked like satisfaction in his eyes. "That is where Lillian's foresight comes into play. She was a meticulous woman." He turned a page. "Allow me to read the subsequent clause titled, 'Distribution of the Residuary Estate.'" He cleared his throat. "All the rest, residue and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, of whatsoever kind, and wheresoever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath to the Lillian Whitmore Legacy Trust." "What the hell is that?" Edward demanded. "A revocable living trust," Alcott explained patiently, as if to a child, "one that Lillian established and has been actively managing for the past 2 years. The primary beneficiaries of this trust are her children, Leo and Sophia Dalton, and the Whitmore Foundation. As of her death, the trust became irrevocable." "Managing," Edward scoffed. "Lillian didn't know the first thing about managing finances. I handled everything." "That appears to be a common misconception," Alcott said coolly. "Your wife, it seems, was a far more astute student of finance than you ever gave her credit for. Over the past 24 months, with my firm's assistance, Lillian systematically and legally transferred all of her personal assets, her entire inheritance from the Whitmore family, into this trust. She also transferred her shares in joint ventures and other assets that were legally hers to control." Edward's mind was reeling. He thought back. The new financial advisors she had hired, claiming she wanted to take a more active role in her philanthropic work. The documents she'd asked him to sign, which he'd dismissed as routine tax planning. He had been so arrogant, so sure of her naivety, that he hadn't even bothered to read the fine print. "The properties, the portfolio, the Dalton shares she held," he stammered. "All legally transferred into the trust," Alcott confirmed. "The matrimonial home is an asset of the trust, The Hamptons Beach House is an asset of the trust. The 60% controlling stake in Dalton Industries that was purchased with Whitmore seed money and therefore legally designated as her personal property in your prenuptial agreement is also an asset of the trust. The colour of Edward's face went from pale to a mottled apoplectic purple. The prenuptial agreement, the document he had bullied her into signing 25 years ago, so sure that he would be the one to accumulate all the wealth. He had insisted on a clause that what was hers before the marriage and all assets derived from it would remain hers. He had thought he was protecting his future empire from her. Instead, he had given her the very weapon she had used to disarm him completely. Cassandra looked at Edward, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury. The 9-figure fortune she had been promised, the life she had gambled everything for, was vanishing like smoke. But why? Edward asked, his voice now a pathetic rasp. Why would she do this? Lillian wished to explain that herself, Alcott said. He reached into the portfolio and pulled out a slim sealed envelope. She left a letter. For you, Edward. And her instructions were that I am to read it aloud. Here. Now. He broke the wax seal which bore the Whitmore family crest. The air crackled with anticipation. This was not just a reading of a will. It was an execution. And Lillian, from the silence of her grave, was the executioner. Gregory Alcott unfolded the single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was unmistakable, Lillian's elegant cursive script, a flowing hand that betrayed none of the turmoil she must have been feeling when she wrote it. As Alcott began to read, it was as if Lillian herself were in the room, her voice calm, measured and utterly devastating. My dearest Edward. The letter began the salutation, dripping with an irony so cold it burned. If you are hearing these words, it means I am gone. I imagine you are sitting in Gregory's office, looking handsome in your grief, perhaps even having shed a tear for the cameras. But we know the truth, don't we? The real mourning period for our marriage ended years ago. You simply forgot to tell me. Edward flinched as if struck. Cassandra shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the focus of every hateful glare in the room. I am not writing this letter out of anger, Edward. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. What I feel now is the clean, cold clarity of purpose. I am writing this to tell you that I knew. I knew everything. I knew about Cassandra Monroe. The letter continued, and Alcott's voice gave the name a clinical precision. I knew that her chance encounter with you at that gallery benefit 2 years ago was anything but. I knew about the apartment you leased for her on the Upper East Side, the one you paid for using funds siphoned from the Dalton Hospitality subsidiary account, an account meant for business development, not personal diversions. Sophia gasped, looking at her father with fresh horror. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated theft from their own family. I knew about the trips to Monaco which you disguised as investor meetings, the Cartier bracelet you bought her for her birthday, which appeared on our joint credit card statement as corporate entertainment. You were not just sloppy, Edward. You were insulting. Did you truly believe I was so blinded by my life of luncheons and charity balls that I wouldn't notice the gaping holes in our finances? Did you think I was that stupid? This is slander? Edward choked out his face, slick with sweat. She was delusional. Alcott ignored him, his eyes fixed on the page. The perfume was the first clue. Fleur de nuit, an aggressive, almost desperate scent. It clung to your Savile Row suits like a stain. Then came the whispers from friends, too loyal to speak plainly, the accidental sightings of you in restaurants you never took me to. So I did what any sensible woman with considerable resources would do. I stopped guessing and started confirming. A flashback, sharp and vivid, bloomed in Leo's mind, his mother months ago, sitting in her library late at night, poring over spreadsheets and bank statements. He had asked what she was doing. "Just balancing the books for the foundation, darling," she had said, with a serene smile. He realized now she hadn't been balancing books. She had been gathering ammunition. The letter continued, each word a precisely aimed shot. "I hired a man named Mr. Peterson, a wonderfully discreet private investigator. His reports were thorough. They included photographs, Edward. Photos of you and Miss Monroe in Paris, on the balcony of the Ritz, looking for all the world like a couple in love. There was one photo in particular that struck me. You were laughing, your head thrown back, with a kind of carefree joy I hadn't seen in 20 years. And in that moment, I didn't feel hurt. I felt pity. Pity that you had to build your happiness on a foundation of lies." The financial investigation was even more revealing. You see, while you were busy playing the tycoon, I was quietly meeting with forensic accountants. They uncovered the shell corporations you'd set up, the systematic way you'd been devaluing shared assets while inflating your personal ones, preparing to leave me with a hollowed-out empire once you'd had your fill. You were planning to divorce me, weren't you, Edward? You were just waiting for the right moment after securing the final round of funding that depended on the Whitmore name. "It wasn't like that," Edward mumbled, his voice devoid of its usual booming confidence. He looked smaller in his chair, shrunken by the weight of her posthumous knowledge. Cassandra was staring at him, now a new, calculating look in her eyes. He had told her he was the financial genius, that Lillian was just a figurehead. He had told her the fortune was his to command. He had lied to her too. And so, Lillian's voice echoed through Alcott. "I made a decision. I would not give you the satisfaction of a messy public divorce. I would not allow you to drag our children through a scandal that would tarnish their names. The Whitmore name, my name, would not be defined by your tawdry affair. Instead, I decided to play the long game. The game you taught me, the one of assets and liabilities, of shrewd investments and cutting your losses. And you, my dear husband, became my greatest loss to cut. The trust was my lifeboat. Every document I asked you to sign, every financial restructuring I proposed under the guise of estate planning, was another plank in that boat. You signed away your future with a flourish of your pen, too arrogant to read the details, too convinced of your own superiority to ever suspect your quiet, docile wife was building a fortress you could never breach. The house you live in, the cars you drive, the company you believe you own, they are not yours. They belong to a legacy you can never touch, a legacy for our children. The children you were so willing to betray. As for you, Miss Monroe, the letter said, and for the first time it addressed the other woman in the room. Cassandra sat bolt upright. I have no words of anger for you. You are merely a symptom of a disease, not the disease itself. You saw an opportunity and you took it. I can almost respect the ambition. But know this, the life you dreamed of, the fortune you coveted, was never his to give. It was always and will always be mine, and I have given it to my children. I leave you with the man you chose, a man with expensive tastes, a mountain of undisclosed debt, and now no income. I truly wish you the best of luck with him." The sheer surgical cruelty of that final sentence hung in the air. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a curse. Alcott folded the letter and placed it on the table. The room was deathly quiet. Edward was breathing heavily, his face ashen. He was ruined. Publicly, financially, personally. He had been so utterly outplayed, so completely dismantled by the woman he had underestimated his entire life. But just as the family began to absorb the magnitude of Lillian's victory, a new, unexpected voice cut through the silence. "She thinks she's so clever," Cassandra Monroe said, her voice dripping with venom. She laughed a short, sharp, ugly sound. "She thinks she won." All eyes turned to her. She was no longer the composed, elegant partner. Her face was a mask of fury. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a thick manila folder, slapping it onto the table with a defiant thud. "That dead bitch may have been smart." Cassandra sneered, her mask of sophistication falling away to reveal something far more common and dangerous. But she wasn't smart enough. She thought Edward's only crime was cheating. That's just adorable. She looked from Leo to Sophia, then to a stunned Edward. "Your father and I had more than just a little affair going on. We had a business partnership," she said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. "And I kept very, very detailed records. So before you all celebrate burying my future, you might want to take a look at what I have in here. Because I promise you, Lillian's little trust fund won't be worth much when the federal government is done seizing every last asset your family owns." The game had just changed. Lillian had won the battle, but Cassandra Monroe was threatening to burn the entire kingdom to the ground. The folder sat on the polished mahogany table like an unexploded bomb. The atmosphere in the room, which had been one of shocked victory for the Whitmore siblings, instantly curdled into one of dread. Edward stared at the folder, a new kind of terror dawning on his face. This was not part of his plan. This was not part of any plan. "What is this, Cassandra?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "What are you doing? I'm securing my future." She shot back, not even bothering to look at him. Her eyes were locked on Leo. She had correctly identified him as the new head of the family, the one who now held the power. "The future that you promised me, Edward. The one that your late wife so inconveniently tried to take away." Leo's expression was cold, unreadable. "What's in the folder, Ms. Monroe? Leverage," she said. With a smug smile, she tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the folder. "You see, your mother was right about one thing. Your father is a terrible businessman, at least when it comes to legitimate business. His real talent lies in creative accounting and insider trading." The words hung in the air, each one a potential death sentence for the Dalton name. Gregory Olcott, who had remained impassive, now looked grave. This went far beyond a domestic dispute over inheritance. This was in the territory of serious white-collar crime. For the past 18 months, Cassandra explained, her voice now confident and commanding, Edward has been using privileged information to make stock trades through a series of offshore accounts, information he got from his friends at the country club, from board members he plays golf with, specifically regarding the pending merger between Petrocorp and Titan Drilling. Penelope gasped. Her late husband had sat on the board of Petrocorp. The information about that merger was one of the most tightly guarded secrets on Wall Street. Edward didn't have the liquidity to make the big plays himself, Cassandra continued, warming to her theme. That's where I came in. I had connections. People who could set up the accounts, make the trades, and launder the profits. We were a team. He got the information, I made it happen. We've already cleared over $30 million. It's sitting in an account in the Cayman Islands waiting to be moved. She paused, letting the weight of her confession sink in. She had just admitted to multiple felonies, but she did so with the unshakable confidence of someone who believed she held an unbeatable hand. This folder, she said, patting it again, contains everything. Encrypted transaction logs, recordings of phone calls with Edward, where he explicitly details the insider information, copies of wire transfers. It's a complete gift-wrapped case for the SEC, and probably the FBI. Edward looked like he was going to be sick. You were recording me. Of course I was, darling, she cooed with mock affection. You didn't think I was as stupid as your wife did you? I always have an insurance policy. She turned her attention back to Leo and Sophia. So here's my offer. It's very simple. Your mother's little will is a cute piece of family drama, but this, she gestured to the folder, this is real life. You are going to instruct your lawyer, Mr. Alcott, to break the trust. You are going to draw up a new agreement where I receive a one-time, non-negotiable payment of $50 million. Clean, untraceable. In exchange for that, I will hand over this folder and every copy I have, and I will disappear from your lives forever. And if we refuse, Sophia asked, her voice trembling but defiant. Cassandra's smile vanished. If you refuse, she said, her voice turning to ice, I will walk out of this office and go directly to the U.S. Attorney's office. This folder will become Exhibit A in the case of the United States versus Edward Dalton. They will freeze every asset tied to his name, which includes the assets he commingled with your mother's estate for years. They will launch an investigation so deep and so public it will make your heads spin. The Dalton name will be synonymous with fraud. Your father will go to prison for a very, very long time. The legal fees alone will bleed your precious trust dry. And by the time the government is done seizing assets and levying fines, your 9-figure inheritance will be lucky to be worth 7. So you can be principled and poor, or you can be practical and rich. Your choice. It was a masterful piece of blackmail. She had them cornered. Paying her off felt disgusting, a betrayal of everything their mother had worked to protect. But the alternative, a public implosion of their entire world, their father jailed, their family name destroyed, was almost unthinkable. Leo stared at the folder, then at his father, who now looked like a trapped animal. He saw no remorse in his father's eyes, only fear of being caught. For the first time, Leo understood the true depth of the man's weakness. We need to discuss this, Leo said, his voice steady. Privately. Fine, Cassandra said, leaning back in her chair. You have 5 minutes. The clock is ticking. Gregory Alcott led Leo, Sophia, and Penelope into his private office, leaving Edward alone with the woman who was systematically destroying him. What do we do? Sophia whispered as soon as the door was closed. We can't give that monster $50 million of Mum's money. It's obscene. What's the alternative, darling? Penelope countered, her voice strained. She's right. A federal investigation would ruin us. The scandal. The money in those offshore accounts, Leo said, thinking aloud. Is it real? I have no doubt it is, Mr. Alcott confirmed grimly. And if she has the evidence, she claims the consequences would be exactly as she described. The government has broad powers of asset forfeiture in cases like this. They would argue that illicit gains were funneled into Dalton Industries for years, effectively poisoning the well. Contesting it would take years and a fortune in legal fees. Leo paced the small office, his mind racing. His mother had been so brilliant, so thorough. But she had been fighting a war on a single front, her husband's infidelity and financial mismanagement within their personal sphere. She hadn't accounted for a second, front one, of brazen, high-level criminal conspiracy. Or had she? Sophia, he said suddenly, his eyes lighting up. Mum's journals. The will said she left them to you. Yes, Sophia said, confused. They're at the house. Why? What else did she leave you? The studio, the necklace. That's it. No. Leo insisted, his memory grasping for a detail. Think, when we were kids, what did Mum always say was her most prized possession? Sophia's eyes widened. The music box, she breathed, the one her father gave her. But it wasn't mentioned in the will. Exactly, Leo said. She wouldn't forget that. It must be with her personal effects. We need to go home. Now. What are you thinking, Leo? Penelope asked. I'm thinking Mum was always 3 steps ahead, he said, a sliver of hope in his voice. She planned for the war she knew about. But maybe she also left us a contingency plan for the one she didn't. He turned to Mr. Alcott. Go back in there. Stall her. Tell her we're considering it, that you're looking into the legality of dissolving the trust. Buy us as much time as you can. Alcott nodded, understanding immediately. I can tie her up in hypothetical legal jargon for at least an hour. Leo grabbed Sophia's hand. Let's go. We're going on a treasure hunt. They left through a back exit, a sense of desperate purpose propelling them forward. They were no longer just victims of their father's betrayal. They were soldiers in their mother's war, and they had just been given one final cryptic order from their commander. The drive back to the family estate was a blur. Leo pushed the speedometer past the legal limit, his mind a whirlwind of fragmented memories and desperate hope. His mother had been a woman of secrets, not malicious ones, but layers of quiet complexity that she rarely revealed. She loved puzzle ciphers and the novels of John le Carré. The idea that she would leave behind a straightforward will with no backup plan seemed, in retrospect, completely out of character. They burst into the house, startling the housekeeper. We need to go to my mother's study, Leo announced, already taking the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. Lillian's study was their sanctuary. It was the one room in the house that Edward rarely entered, claiming the scent of old books, and potpourri gave him a headache. It was lined with dark cherry wood bookshelves, filled with everything from Victorian poetry to modern thrillers. A large ornate desk sat before a bay window overlooking the gardens she had so meticulously cultivated. Sophia went straight to the mantelpiece. There, next to a silver-framed photo of her and Leo as children, sat the music box. It was a beautiful antique, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, and a delicate, hand-painted scene of a ballerina. Sophia lifted the lid. A tinkling, familiar melody, Debussy's Clair de Lune, filled the silence. The tiny ballerina began to twirl. "It's just a music box, Leo," she said, her voice laced with disappointment. "No," Leo said, coming to stand beside her. "Look closer." He gently stopped the ballerina's rotation. Dad bought her a new one for their 20th anniversary. A bigger, gaudier one. She kept it in the living room. But this was her favorite. Why? He ran his fingers along the velvet-lined interior. Near the back, his finger caught on a slight imperfection. A tiny, almost invisible seam. He pressed it. With a soft click, a false bottom popped open, revealing a small, hollow compartment. Inside lay 2 items, a small, ornate brass key and a folded piece of paper. Sophia unfolded the paper. It was another note in their mother's handwriting. "My dearest children, if you are reading this, it means the will was not enough. It means a threat has emerged that I could not fully anticipate, but one for which I tried to prepare. Your father's greed is a sickness, and sickness attracts parasites. This key opens my private safe deposit box at Sterling National Bank, the one registered under my maiden name, Lillian Whitmore. Gregory Alcott does not know of its existence. No one does. Inside you will find my final contingency plan. Trust your instincts. Protect our name. And know that I love you more than life itself. Your mother." They stared at each other, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. Their mother had known she couldn't account for every variable, so she had created a fail-safe, a final weapon to be deployed only when all else had failed. Sterling National Bank is downtown, Sophia said, her voice filled with renewed purpose. It's only 15 minutes from here. Let's go, Leo said, pocketing the key. 40 minutes later they were standing in the cold, sterile vault of the bank. A nervous bank manager had verified their identities, and Lillian's death certificate granting them access. He used his master key, and then Leo inserted the small brass key. The heavy steel door swung open. The box was larger than they expected, and it was filled not with jewels or bonds, but with documents. On the very top was a leather-bound ledger. Leo opened it. The pages were filled with their mother's precise script. But it wasn't a journal. It was a detailed accounting log. "What is it?" Sophia whispered. It's a shadow ledger." Leo breathed his eyes, scanning the pages. For the past 2 years, Mum wasn't just tracking the money Dad was stealing from her. She was tracking the money he was making with Cassandra. He pointed to a line item. "Look, March 12th. Offshore transfer, CM, 1.5 mils. Source, Petrocorp Intel." Page after page detailed the illicit trades. Lillian had somehow gained access to the offshore accounts. She had dates, amounts, and source information for every single transaction Cassandra had boasted about. She had been building her own case against them in parallel to their own criminal conspiracy. But that wasn't the most explosive part. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a separate file. It contained a signed affidavit from a man named Marcus Thorne, a disgraced former IT specialist at Edward's company. The affidavit was a confession. 2 years ago, Edward had instructed Thorne to install a sophisticated keylogger and audio surveillance program on Cassandra Monroe's personal laptop and phone under the guise of corporate security. Edward hadn't trusted his mistress for a second. He was spying on her, recording her every move, her every conversation. The file contained transcripts of Cassandra on the phone with her own financial contacts, openly discussing how she planned to eventually blackmail Edward and take a larger share of the profits. It even detailed her plan to use the evidence she was collecting as leverage. Lillian's final note in the ledger was chilling. He was building a cage for her, and she was sharpening a knife for him. They deserved each other. The attached flash drive contains the complete audio and data files from Thorne. He gave them to me in exchange for a generous severance and my silence about his own minor embezzlements. It seems your father's treachery created an unlikely ally. At the very bottom of the safe deposit box was a single sealed envelope addressed to Agent Fitzpatrick, White Collar Crime Division, FBI. Leo picked it up. It was heavy. "Oh my God," Sophia whispered. "Mum didn't just collect this evidence for us. She was preparing to give it to the authorities herself." She was giving him a choice, Leo realized. The will was his chance to walk away, broken but free. She must have hoped he would just take the humiliation and disappear. She didn't want to send the father of her children to prison if she could avoid it. It was a final, devastating act of mercy from a woman he had shown none. A mercy he had, through his own arrogance, spat upon by bringing Cassandra to the meeting. He had triggered the trap himself. "But Cassandra's threat changes things," Leo said, his voice hard. "Mum's mercy is off the table. Cassandra thinks she's holding a gun to our heads. The truth is, Mum built a cannon, and she just handed us the fuse." He pulled out his phone and dialed Gregory Alcott. "Mr. Alcott," he said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "Tell Ms. Monroe we're on our way back, and tell her we have a counteroffer." They walked out of the bank vault and into the sunlight, no longer the grieving children, but the executors of their mother's final brilliant act of justice. The game wasn't over. It had just been reset, and they were finally holding all the cards. The atmosphere in the conference room had soured during their absence. Cassandra was pacing impatiently, her expensive perfume mingling with the stale scent of fear radiating from Edward. Gregory Alcott sat at the head of the table, a sphinx-like expression on his face, having successfully filibustered for nearly an hour and a half with circular legal arguments. The door opened, and Leo and Sophia entered. The change in their demeanor was palpable. The grief and uncertainty were gone, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. They moved with the confidence of people who knew the outcome before the final play was made. "Well," Cassandra demanded, tapping her watch. "Have you come to your senses? Where's the money?" Leo didn't answer her directly. He walked to the table and placed the leather-bound ledger down with a heavy thud. It looked identical to the one Alcott had read the will from a book of final judgment. "We have a counteroffer, Miss Monroe," Leo said, his voice calm and clear. "You're going to walk out of this room with nothing but the clothes on your back. You're going to surrender your phone, your laptop, and the keys to the apartment my father leased for you. Then you're going to disappear. If you ever contact any member of my family again, in any way, we will use this to ensure you spend the next 20 years in a federal prison." Cassandra stared at him, then let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Are you insane? You have nothing. I have the folder." "What you have," Sophia interjected, her voice cutting like glass, "is a copy of evidence our mother was already compiling against you and our father." Leo opened the ledger. "Our mother, you see, was far more thorough than you. She didn't just know about the affair. She knew about the insider trading. She had transaction dates, account numbers, everything. She even had a source inside your little operation." He then pulled out the affidavit from Marcus Thorne and the small flash drive. "But this is the interesting part. This is a sworn statement from your IT guy, the one who installed the spyware on your devices. On his orders." Leo jerked his head toward Edward, who looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Cassandra's face went white. The confidence drained out of her, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. "We have everything, Cassandra," Leo continued relentlessly. "Every call where you plotted to blackmail him. Every email to your offshore bankers. We have you on tape, admitting to your intent to extort our family. Your little insurance policy. It turns out it was his insurance policy against you, and now it's our weapon against you both. Your folder implicates our father." "It's true," Sophia said, stepping forward. "But our evidence, our mother's evidence, implicates him and proves your role as a co-conspirator who was actively planning to defraud her partner. While your evidence might get you a reduced sentence for cooperating, ours would add charges of conspiracy and attempted extortion. You'd be buried so deep in the legal system you'd forget what the sun looks like." Cassandra stumbled backward, speechless. She looked at Edward, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "You were spying on me." Edward couldn't even meet her gaze. He was finished, trapped between his wife's posthumous genius and his mistress's treachery. "So here's the deal," Leo said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This is a one-time offer. My mother's final gift to us was the power to choose. My sister and I choose to protect her legacy. Our father will face justice. That is not negotiable." He slid the sealed envelope, addressed to the FBI, across the table. "This will be delivered today. His fate is sealed." He then looked directly at Cassandra. "But you are just a parasite, as my mother said, and we have no interest in wasting any more of our energy on you, so you can leave. Now, with nothing. Or you can stay, and we can hand the FBI evidence against 2 criminals instead of 1. Choose." For a long moment, Cassandra stood frozen, her mind processing the utter demolition of her plans. The life she had schemed for killed Forshin spirit was gone. She looked at Edward with pure hatred, then at the two siblings who stood as judge and jury. They were no longer children. They were Whitmores wielding the power their mother had passed down to them. Without a word, she opened her handbag, took out her phone, and placed it on the table. She slid the key fob for the apartment next to it. Then she turned and walked out of the conference room, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of defeat. The door closed behind her, and she was gone. The room was silent, except for Edward's ragged breathing. He looked at his children, his face a pathetic mask of despair. "Leo, Sophia, please," he whimpered. "I'm your father." "Our father," Leo said, his voice devoid of all emotion, "died a long time ago. Our mother, however, lives on through us." Gregory Alcott picked up the envelope addressed to the FBI. He looked at Leo and Sophia, a question in his eyes. Leo gave a single decisive nod. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Edward Dalton was arrested the following week. The ensuing investigation and trial were a media sensation, but Leo and Sophia, shielded by Alcott and the power of the Whitmore name, remained out of the public eye. They liquidated the tainted Dalton assets, using the clean, protected funds from their mother's trust to double the endowment of the Whitmore Foundation, creating new wings for hospitals and scholarships for underprivileged students. They kept the house, filling it not with memories of their father's betrayal, but with the enduring spirit of their mother's strength. They learned that their mother's sudden illness had indeed been just that, a rare and aggressive cancer that had given her only 6 months to live. She had spent not a single moment of that time on self-pity. She had spent it all on securing her children's future and ensuring that justice in its own cold, meticulous way would be served. She had not let her husband's betrayal be the final chapter of her story. Instead, she had written an epilogue of her own, one of fire intelligence and a love for her children so powerful it reached back from beyond the grave to protect them one last time. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a cheating husband and a vengeful will. It was a testament to a woman who refused to be a victim. Lillian Dalton proves that true strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, meticulous planning that unfolds when no one is watching. She turned her pain into a strategy, her grief into a fortress, and her final act was not one of revenge, but of ultimate protection for the ones she loved. It's a chilling reminder that the deepest betrayals often inspire the most brilliant forms of justice. What would you have done in Lillian's shoes? Or in her children's? Is justice served best cold, or is there always room for mercy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of a woman's incredible foresight and a family's fight for their legacy captivated you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of ultimate justice, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramas that you won't want to miss. Thank you for listening.